Okay, well, why don't we get started? Welcome to the Bench to Market Talks. This is a series of talks that are hosted by Biolocity, the Georgia Tech Teed Institute for Bioengineering Bioscience, and also Georgia CTSA. And we're really excited to have our panelists join us today to talk about journeys through the trenches. So this is always a lot of fun to hear about people who actually have gone through different stages of the commercialization process, what's worked for them, what hasn't, just interesting stories from their journey. And but before we get started, I wanted to share some announcements with you, some kind of exciting things that are going on in our community. John, I think you need to advance the slides. Yeah, so we have some interesting funding opportunities that are coming up. Science to Startup. This is a symposium that is going to be held, I believe it's in Boston. Is that correct, John? And or Cambridge. This is an opportunity for early stage startups to present in front of some different venture capitals and capital firms. John was saying that he did this last year and it was quite successful. So this might be something to think about. We also have 2848 Ventures Biotech Studio, and the link to that is in the slide here. I don't know too much about that, but yes, I think if you're interested in early stage funding, you could look into these two opportunities. Next slide. Also just want to do a shout out on these legal office hours that are coming up. And this is a partnership with Emory School of Law with Nicole Morris. So please, if you're interested in learning more about intellectual property and what you need to do to protect your ideas, please make an appointment at the link below. Next slide. Wanted to give a shout out to the Lab to Launch. I think as most people know here, they have opened up their wonderful facility over in Emory HSRB. And this is an opportunity for a place for our spin-out companies to land in a really beautiful space that has just opened. And if you are interested, Harry Gerard, his link is right here for more information. Next slide. Biolocity is getting ready to accept some RFPs for their for folks to apply for Biolocity funding, and the deadline is, I'm talking this with some stuff on my, is December 1st, 2023. So if you're interested, apply now. And I think one of the first steps is to have a little conversation with folks at Biolocity to see if your technology is ready or appropriate for this funding. So this is a really great opportunity for a lot of our early stage startups. Next slide. Also just a shout out to the BARDA, EZBAA, and some of their areas of interest here. And if you're interested, there is a link in this slide as well to look into BARDA funding. Next slide. Our next Bench to Market talk will be location, location, location. This, I believe, is actually going to be in person at the Lab to Launch site at Emory. So this is an opportunity for you to come learn more about Lab to Launch, the incubator site, and actually, look at some of the beautiful facility that they have there. Next slide. And today's talk is Journey Through the Trenches, and we're really fortunate to have three entrepreneurs with us today. All of these folks are academic researchers who have taken the plunge into the startup world and are here to share their company's unique origin stories in the areas of diagnostics, devices, and the therapeutic space. Dr. Sally McFall is a research professor with Northwestern, where she's the co-PI for the Center for Innovation of Point-of-Care Technology for HIV/AIDS and Emerging Infectious Disease. She is also the former CSO of Minute Molecular Diagnostics, which merged with Nuclein, which is a producer of rapid PCR tests for infectious disease. Dr. Yogi Patel is a Georgia Tech alum with a track record of building companies, and he is currently the president and CEO of Focus Cryo, a company that is developing smart cryoablation systems. And Dr. Jeff Sands is currently the director of renal medicine at Emory School of Medicine, and he's also the co-founder of NephroDI Therapeutics, and he soon will be their chief medical officer. NephroDI is developing a novel AMPK activator as a first-in-class therapeutic for nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So I just wanted to thank you all for being with us today. And this is going to be kind of a back and forth. I have some questions that I can ask you, but I also would encourage the audience at any time to put some questions into the chat, or speak up if you have some specific questions for any of our panelists. So if that sounds good to everybody, I'm going to get started. So I think I'll go, start with Sally, and then we'll go to Yogi, and then to Jeff. And I would just like to, get some of your origin story. How did you come up with the idea for your company, and what problem were you trying to solve? So Sally, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So here at Northwestern, at the Center for Innovation and Global Health Technologies, where I'm a co-director, our mission is to develop diagnostic tests for low and middle income countries, and our focus is really on sub-Saharan Africa. And we had tried a variety of funding mechanisms to try to develop technology, diagnostic tests that could be used in Africa, and we always ran out of steam. So we started with one of the first Grand Challenges Award from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we were our role was to to develop technology to de-risk that development process for larger diagnostic companies, so they could pick it up and then start marketing it in Africa. And that wasn't in the cards for the diagnostic companies. It wasn't the development cost, the R&D, that was holding them back. It was the opportunity cost, when they could be marketing products here in the high resource countries and making more money. That it's a shareholder issue. So we said, okay, let's partner with a diagnostic company. And so we were developing a test for HIV viral load. And it ended up where we had too many requirements. We had requirements for low resource settings. We had requirements for high resource settings. And we just didn't get anywhere in that. So we thought it over and decided what we needed to do was to develop technology here with investors, market our product, and then when funds allow, take that to low resource settings. We thought that this gives us more control over what we're doing. And so I was a co-founder of Minute Molecular Diagnostics with David Kelso and Kara Palamountain from Northwestern. And David Kelso had been a very successful developer of diagnostic technology for Abbott Labs. And so he was able to get angel investors from different executives that he had worked with over the years that believed in him. And our goal was to develop a point-of-care test that would give a result within 15 minutes in the clinical encounter. And so that was our mission. That's what we were, what we were developing. And then COVID happened. And so there we were able to get quite a bit of funding from the RADx program in order to really accelerate our development and our commercial, getting our manufacturing in place. But COVID is really a double-edged sword because we really needed a lot of tests all at once, and then we didn't need any tests. And so frankly, we ran out of money. And so we merged with another small company that had more infrastructure for commercializing than we did. And we're continuing now to, so we live to fight another day. So we're developing new tests for our Dash platform that we developed. And so Northwestern, we're still developing tests, and it gives me more freedom now because I'm not directly related to the company, so I can also develop tests for low and middle income countries as well as for high income countries. So I can kind of have more freedom to keep pushing what my original goal. So I apologize I went on and on.
Yeah, that's really a great story because you've got a couple of tough things here. You're developing a diagnostic, which a lot of times VCs are a little hesitant to go into that area. So it's a little tough. And then also you started off with wanting to commercialize it in lower resource countries. And so that's a really interesting story, how you pivoted then to, first world, and then you would later on go on and with maybe, grant funds and things like that, move on to what was your original idea. So that's really interesting. So thank you very much for that story. And I think we'll go on to Yogi. It's your turn. You want to talk a little bit about, again, how did you get your idea for your company and what was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Sure. So none of these stories are ever really linear, right? It's all over the place. And I think ours it fits right in. So I spent 6 years at Georgia Tech doing my PhD in what I thought was the solution to everything in a field called neuromodulation. So these are devices implanted in people to stimulate parts of the brain or the nervous system to enhance, decrease activity, et cetera. And we did a lot of work, and fortunately, we went through a lot of the business school programs, the venture lab work, and we were fortunate to have that around us to help educate us on what we needed to do. But ultimately, what we learned after a few years of work and a lot of money and good success is that the patients didn't care, or they didn't really like what we had built. People didn't want to go through these surgeries. They didn't want to really have these high risk implants. Even though there was data, at least from our work, that showed that there was a lot of value to them from a therapeutic perspective. And again, I should preface that my world has always been medical devices, med tech, not biological therapeutics, but I think there's a lot of good overlap. And that really left a void in me over the years of, okay, we had really figured out some really novel science. We had figured out some really interesting ways to help people. But the solution, the technology, the hammer we had built was really just wrong for the nail. And we would have never guessed that at the end of the day, even if you showed benefit, patients would say no. And so fast forward about 2 years after finishing my PhD, I got connected to, so I had been in touch with the GRA, the Georgia Research Alliance, all those years through my years of graduate school. And I got connected by Lee Heron, who is still at the GRA and a fantastic individual that I recommend anybody interested in commercialization talk to. And he connected me with my now co-founder, David Prologo, who's an Emory interventional radiologist. And really the conversations at that point started around what are the minimally invasive approaches that a physician, such as an interventional radiologist that uses CT guidance, that uses ultrasound guidance, can use to potentially do the same things that we were doing, but with very severe or significant implants or surgeries. And that really led us down this process. It took about, I think, 9-10 months to really understand where the landscape was in terms of technologies today, approaches today, and then figuring out, sort of going through this binary search approach of saying, okay, well, there's this kind of thing, or there's these types of injections. And then really identifying where the void was that fit our scientific solution. And I think that's been the biggest lesson for us is we had great science, we had great physiology, great biology, sort of great stuff backing it. And we kind of just thought, okay, we're great engineers, we'll figure out the solution and, we'll build it. And I think, looking back, it was definitely eye-opening, and it continues to be an eye-opener that all the science is great, everything works, it's great, but sometimes these commercialization efforts need to work backwards, not forwards from the science to really understand it. So fast forward to today, we're 4 years in. Focus Cryo is the company that David and I started. We've raised about $12 million to date from angel investors, venture capital, had a lot of support from Biolocity, Georgia Research Alliance. We make a minimally invasive cryoablation platform. It's the only platform that's ever been made that allows for controlling temperature gradients inside of the body, which is a very big challenge, at least from the world of interventionalists and proceduralists. And that does a lot to help titrate what is done for the therapeutic outcome for the patient. So we're still pre-FDA, but we are hopefully going to have our pre-FDA clearance, but we should have clearance in the next 3 to 6 months. And we've got some other conversations that are going about it, but that's what's brought us to where we are today.
Oh, that's really cool, Yogi. Did you have a FDA pre-sub meeting?
We did. So I think what's been very helpful from the beginning is we've had 2 pre-sub meetings with the FDA. We had one early on just about the science, really around kind of what we were proposing to do, early concepts of the technology. And then we had a follow-up in which we had done a lot of that work and we had gone back to present. And, you know, everyone always talks about the FDA as there's a surefire sort of, you know, outcome that you're going to submit and they're going to come back with a rejection of some sort. And I think you can get ahead of that with these pre-subs. And I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback. They have, in many ways, helped us refine a lot of our test protocols and verify that when we finally submit something officially to them, it will dot all the I's, cross the T's, and hopefully reduce the time to clearance.
Great. Thank you. Jeff, would you like to talk about your company and how you got the idea and what is the problem that you are trying to solve?
Sure. So as it turns out, I was at the National Organization for Rare Disease Summit the last 2 days in Washington. And this is the 40th anniversary of the Orphan Disease Act, which is legislation that really encouraged and made it financially possible, really, for the development of therapies for orphan diseases. Where our company is focused is on an orphan disease. It's called congenital nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, hence the name of the company of NephroDI Therapeutics, which is an X-linked disorder in which these boys, being X-linked, I can just say boys because girls almost never get it, will make 20 liters of urine a day. And I'll think about it, that's a liter an hour, 24/7, 365. And so they have to drink a liter an hour, 24/7, 365. So that's what we're focused on. But the origins of the company and the idea really came from the basic research that my lab has done over the decades here at Emory, in which we were studying the urine concentrating mechanism, looking at how the kidney in normal situations produces concentrated or dilute urine. And then from that, we looked at started looking at alternative signaling pathways that may be involved with the idea that in the disease, the receptor is mutant, but everything else downstream of the receptor is fine, at least in one form of the disease. I'm simplifying a little bit, but so my thought was, well, now that we know how vasopressin activates the V2 receptor, stimulates protein kinase A, leading to activation of water reabsorption, if the receptor is mutant, can we find other ways to activate it? And we went through a series of potential kinases until we found AMP kinase. And the idea for AMP kinase actually came from a seminar that I was sitting in that had nothing to do with anything we were looking at, but I connected some dots and we did some experiments that showed that AMP kinase activation could actually do some of the things that the native pathway did. We also had to develop an animal model for studying this, since there really weren't good animal models that were available. The knockout mice die so quickly that you can't do more than a day or two study. So we were at this point, and I had actually served on the Coulter Oversight Committee through most of the decade of the 2000s. And Coulter was the predecessor to Biolocity. And so I had been educated really as to how to think about the possibilities of commercialization, and was aware of needing to protect one's IP and the kind of things that Coulter was supporting. So I met with, it was still called Coulter, and Rachel Hagan was actually running the program at the time. And I said, is this something that Coulter would ever consider supporting as we try to develop a therapy based on AMP kinase activators? And she said yes, because what she was aware of and what I wasn't was the Orphan Drug Act and what that actually did to encourage development in the rare disease space. So we were fortunate to get Coulter funding, and then the success of that, we needed to raise more money. And so in 2017, we formed a company, NephroDI Therapeutics, so that we could compete for SBIR, STTR funding. We had obtained GRA funding, and look for investment from a VC. And so that was kind of it was taking it from literally the bench, our own work, leading to thoughts of, now that we know how it works, can we find a way to fix it when it doesn't work? And focused in particular, taking advantage of the orphan disease space. There's always some serendipity in any project, and it just so happened that we had found a pair of medicinal chemists in Georgia who had AMP kinase activators that they were developing for diabetes mellitus, and they didn't work. They didn't lower blood sugar. And I said, you're saying the wrong kind of diabetes. That would be perfect for us if they worked. And sure enough, they sent them to us. We tested them. They did. And it was that combination that led to everything that happened since then. And recently, we've had some additional investment, and we're in late preclinical development. Hopefully, we will finish by the end of the calendar year, at which point I leave Emory and become Chief Medical Officer of the company as we work through the pre-IND and IND process in 24.
Well, that's really exciting about the, coming across those medicinal chemists that had some compounds. So now your company obviously has composition of matter patent on the AMPK activators, and you've built some chemical space around it. And that is just super exciting. Very nice. The
company had to license the composition of matter from the chemists who had made them, and license the method of use from Emory. And so the company has licensed all the technologies.
Very cool. Thank you for that. Oh, do we have any questions from the audience so far for folks? I don't see any questions in the chat. Give it a few more minutes here. Well, I have some other questions to keep. How did you know that your idea was worth pursuing? Sally, do you want to start?
Well, so our goal was to develop a point-of-care molecular test that would give an answer in 15 minutes or less. And that 15 minutes was based on research that had been performed at Johns Hopkins about how long will people wait to get an answer for a test, performed in the doctor's office. And 15 minutes was the time. So that was, we said, okay, this is the goal. And it seemed kind of unachievable for a molecular test at the time. But at the same time, there had been a paper that came from Carl Whitworth's lab, who he demonstrated that the limitation of PCR wasn't the enzyme, it was the heat transfer. So it wasn't a biology problem, it was an engineering problem. And so that's how we approached trying to achieve this, and we could get the PCR in less than 5 minutes. So then we had 10 minutes for the rest. And so we basically just kept working on that concept with those constraints. And that's how we knew we knew we had a good idea. We didn't know if we could achieve it, but we set the constraints and we tried to see how good could we get within those constraints. And so that was really exciting, because that's a way to really let your creative juices flow, is to have certain constraints. You're not all over the place, right? You have a goal, you have constraints, but how can you get there when no one else has gotten there yet?
Yogi, can you talk about how did you discover that? How did you pivot to this idea and think that it was worth doing and pursuing, and had actual business model you could create around it?
Yeah, I think having PTSD from our first experience with getting rejected by patients, what we ended up doing is, both David and I, the first 9 or 10 months of this company, we went out and pretty much met with a bunch of interventional radiologists. We met with larger med tech companies that were in this space, really to understand, where there was the need for innovation, where the challenges were. We found sales reps and talked to them because they had the best sites of insight. They had the best sources of insight. And we talked to some patients that had also had complications. And really, it wasn't until I think we had talked to maybe 150 people across that profile spectrum that we decided, okay, I think where we've really built, where we're looking at our solution and what we're attempting to build and what we have built has started validation. And then that led us to going back and doing another round of sort of validating interviews and discussions with some of the users that we now have in terms of our KOLs and early adopters for this system. And so I think a lot of ours was driven by really the old, discovery process that we had been taught, and it paid dividends. I think it helped us scope out the right features for our platform, helped make sure that what we were about to start building was in fact the proper definition, and we hadn't come up with something super complicated that no one cared about. And I think ultimately what that helped us do is build the right team, make sure our funds were utilized for the right purposes, because it's very easy to burn through tons of money at these early stages. And I think what it also did is, I think it really lined us up to be where we are today, which is we have a few companies that we're talking to about, some transactions or partnerships that move this beyond FDA clearance.
Great. Well, thank you. Sally and Yogi, we always talk about the importance of customer discovery early on, right? And so really trying to figure out, to give us an idea of what the end user really wants, so that we can then build that into our product. And that's super important. And Yogi, you gave a great example of your first endeavor and how it ended up patients didn't want that. And there were a lot of big companies working on that too. So I don't know where they have landed. But now, Jeff, it's a little different for you, because right. I think for a medical doctor or for something, customer discovery is not perhaps as important. But maybe you can talk a little bit about this disease, why you ended up this being your primary indication for your drug, and that'd be great.
Well, sure. As you say, although I'm an adult nephrologist, I was very aware of this, despite being a congenital condition, the unmet medical need. There was absolutely nothing that you can do for these patients other than that they have to drink this enormous amount of water to keep up. So there were a series of, actually, there's a Nephrogenic Diabetes Insipidus Foundation that hosted several scientific meetings in the 2000s that I was a speaker at. And so I knew about the unmet medical need and that these patients were desperate for some sort of therapy. The reason we chose to focus initially on the congenital nephrogen population, so in addition to congenital NDI, which is a rare disease, there are acquired forms of NDI, most commonly in patients who take lithium. And as an adult nephrologist, that's what I would typically see, are patients who develop this as a consequence of lithium. But from a development point of view, the pediatric indication seemed cleaner. These boys, the only thing wrong with them is their V2 receptor doesn't work. There is nothing else medically wrong. And so a therapy designed to help them make less urine in the absence of other factors seemed like a cleaner study. Whereas in the lithium patients, they also have psychiatric illness, and there's many co-founders that you would have to control for.
Yeah.
The other is that because of the Orphan Drug Act, the pathway to market was much quicker. We need to do a phase 1 study, as everyone does, for safety, and then you move to your pivotal phase 2 study. You don't have to do a phase 3 study because there just aren't enough people in the world to do a phase 3. Right. So from just the fastest path to getting to market was to pursue the congenital. Also, it's where we saw the greatest patient need, because untreated, these boys can develop severe episodes of dehydration. It leads to cognitive impairment. Fortunately, not so much in the US now that it's recognized, but I still get emails from third world patients in third world countries where it's not diagnosed and they do have cognitive impairment. And there are other consequences from not having a treatment. So we thought the biggest bang for the benefit, not for the buck, but for the benefit, is to prevent, treat the kids so that they are neurologically intact and they don't develop chronic kidney disease. And if we can get to market for that indication, then presumably down the line, when somebody acquires the company, Big Pharma could do that big study to test other markets like lithium, where you would need a phase 3 and have to do all the controls, right, because it is it's actually more complicated to study patients with mental illness than kids.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. We do have a question from the audience, which I think is perfect for right now. Can you describe how you built a team to fill in all the gaps of the company? Sally, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So for us, we were really needing to start to fill gaps at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. So that was really challenging. And so I think we relied a lot upon kind of colleagues and their recommendations. We had this saying that we didn't want to get a new business card during that time because it was just, we had to grow at an explosive rate. So I don't think my experience is necessarily universal. Then also when we were funded by RADx, they provided a lot of help in filling gaps. So we were just kind of lucky to be involved in that area, but I guess overall you could say that maybe working with a consultant initially and starting to get what you need into your company, and then finding if that's enough or whether you need to bring someone in to fill that gap. And then once you know more about it, you'll be in a better position to actually find someone that fits that niche. If you don't know anything about it, it's really hard to find somebody that will fulfill that.
Yogi, can you?
Yeah. When we started Focus Cryo, because it was David and myself, we split all the work between business and engineering and sort of clinical and science, sort of kind of making those two hybrid things. And I think it worked initially in the discovery phases, but as we started saying, okay, we need to actually build things, we need to build a business model, we need to build our reimbursement model, we need to build a regulatory model. It became very clear that even though we thought, both David and I thought we could do everything, it was required that first and foremost, we kind of scoped out and said, look, here are the things that we're going to focus on and give ourselves some boundaries, because it's very easy to think that we'll just go do everything. Even if it's two of us working, it's easy to get into silos. And I think it's important to make those scopes initially. So even though I've been a co-founder, a CEO with him since the beginning, it was very important for me to say, I'll focus on XYZ, you focus on ABC, and then we need to find people that will do these things because these aren't in our pedigree or aren't in our experience set. And then the way we did it beyond that is we actually went out and found retired individuals that had been in this domain for a long time, that had brought a few products to the market. And we really went through with them the exercise of, okay, what are the steps that we don't know? Because of course we knew we were building a medical device. We knew it was class 2. We knew what we needed to do from a clinical regulatory perspective at a high level. But there are so many nuances that you just don't know until you go through the process for especially what we were building or have built, which is a fairly large capital system with disposables, et cetera. And so we found a few individuals that, like Sally mentioned, they were consultants at first with us. They had a ton of experience with engineering, regulatory, clinical, reimbursement, and they really helped us map out all the things that we would need to do to get to our key milestones. And for the first 6 to 12 months, we really were heavy on consultants. So we had an R&D firm that we were working with where we were doing all the core engineering that we could do in-house, but then we had them as a partner. We had consultants that were helping us with what we needed to do for some of the business model elements that we didn't have access to right away. And eventually, we were able to come up with scopes that have continued to keep them as consultants. And then we've also brought in people that were consultants, and then they had their own interest in joining us. They worked really well with us. We saw their value add, and they've come into the company with us. So I think the starting with consulting approach with very defined scopes is a great way to kind of trial and error. And also it helps you with financial management because you can very clearly sort of turn the switch off if it's not working. If you go to hire people right away, that's a very fast burn. There's a lot of onboarding. There's a high risk. If you have to let go of someone, it's even more expensive. So there's a value proposition from your financial strategy as well there that I think would work very well. And then I think the final thing I would say is, it does, I think at some point as new things get added on, it's very easy for the existing team to say, okay, I can reach and do this. But what we've found is that if we carefully plan out from milestone to milestone the activities that we have to get done, and we're really honest about what we're good at versus what we need to have somebody come in with, it helps us typically plan 2-3 months ahead, and then we can just iterate on that model. We can bring a new consultant in. If it works well for that given project and they're interested, we can really bring them into the scope. So that's how we've built it so far. We are a team of about 35 people now between consultants and full-time. To Sally's point, a lot of our hiring started in COVID, and we are distributed. We have about 10 or 12 people in Atlanta, and then got a bunch of people in California, a bunch of people in Minnesota, and some overseas, and that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, COVID was really changed things a lot and opened up some possibilities as well as being a terrible disaster. That's really cool. Jeff, do you want to talk about your company and how you filled the gaps and how you grew it? That'd be great.
Sure. So we're a very small company, and we've operated primarily as a virtual company. At the start, there were 5 founders, the 2 medicinal chemists, Dr. Janet Klein and I at Emory, and our CEO, Rachel Hagan. And at the beginning, Rachel was working for Sweat Equity, and that helped. Janet and I were able to do a lot of the experiments here at Emory through an STTR grant that was able. So we did a lot, like all academic labs, we did it all on a shoestring. And then once we got some seed and venture investment, we brought on board consultants in toxicology and PK and did the work through CROs, where again, the only employee of the company was the CEO, and the rest of us were not. As in the last 6 months or 4 months, as we've gotten more investment, We've continued to be lean in the sense of using consultants, using CROs, but the company is actually now up to a robust 3 employees, and come January will be up to 5. So it's keeping it virtual, keeping as a limited payroll expenses because very few employees, and outsourcing the work through CROs.
Great, that makes a lot of sense. Let me look at. So I'm going to ask the next question. It's kind of related to some questions that are in the chat, and that is, how did you find the resources to advance your technology? So we talked a little bit about personnel and how you built that out, but also you want to talk a little bit about funding, incubator space, how you went around that, how you also dealt with the maybe Jeff, you can speak a little bit to the wall between the academic work that you're doing with Emory and then what you're doing with the company, how you manage that. Sally, do you want to start with that? How you found the resources?
So I'm at Northwestern, and our spin-out company, Minute Molecular Diagnostic, was an experiment with Northwestern of not actually spinning out, but staying in place. So we were, so we have our spin-out company, Northwestern, at Minute Molecular, which provided grant money to the lab here at Northwestern to develop the engineering and the biochemistry. And so we didn't find incubator space. We just stayed where we are. And then with COVID, we received a grant from NIBIB to build a pilot manufacturing facility in Northwestern. So we actually do product development in our biomedical engineering department. So I know it's not a very generalizable situation, but that's just how it worked for us. And a lot of our funding did come because of the COVID pandemic. And we started with, as I mentioned before, angel investors, some small awards, kind of catalyzer type awards. And then we really were able to complete our development and start into our manufacturing through resources that we got from the NIH and RADx.
So your resources were a combination of equity funding from angel investors and also grants?
Yep.
So to get the angel investor, you must have spun out early, but at the same time, so I'm sorry.
We spun out in 2017. And so we were developing our, basic technology from 2017 to 2020. And then we really accelerated development at that time to be in the market to try to address the pandemic.
Thanks. Yogi, do you want to talk a little bit about how you found this?
Sure. So we staged everything by milestones. We went from idea to our first milestone, which was really that, can we take this idea and turn it into something tangible, meaning does it work? We did that over the course of about 12 months through only grant funding, really sweat equity and grant funding. So we had funding from the Georgia Research Alliance. We had some funding from the Emory I3, I believe it's called, awards. And that was great because it gave David and I what we needed to really give ourselves the confidence that technology could be built. It could do what we think it needs to do, and we could do the interviews, discoveries we needed to really make sure that we're going to hit our milestones. After that first milestone, that's when we got into the Biolocity program. That gave us another round of non-dilutive funding, which was fantastic. And that got us to our next milestone, which was really prototype in hand. And that's when we really went out and raised our first round from angel investors. That was in February of 2021, and since then we've raised a little more than 10 million from our investors, including some VC groups. And I think it was great because those non-dilutive dollars, one, they come with a lot of great in-kind services, so the Georgia Research Alliance, Biolocity, et cetera. These are deep networks, so when you don't know something or you need to find someone with some expertise or someone with the tool or setting to do something in, makes it a lot easier to open on the doors. But also, it doesn't tie us up to the pressure of what are we going to tell our investors if this, we don't get a prototype by this time or XYZ. So I think that was wonderful for us in those early days.
Are you a virtual company or do you have a location somewhere?
We are still virtual. I mean, we have manufacturing, which is based in California for all the FDA purposes. And we've got some remote work locations that some of our team meets at, but we've had a lot of success with giving people flexibility.
Great. Jeff, talk a little bit about your company and how you got the resources to get to where you are today.
Sure. So initially we got support from Coulter at the time, and then GRA. And after that, we did get some I3 funding from Emory. And actually the I3 funding let us generate data that led to getting an STTR from the NIH. So we did almost all of that with a combination of non-dilutive funding and sweat equity. But then we were able, the CEO's job was to go out and get more money, of course. And we did get seed investment from a venture capital firm where they took an equity position. And that's what led us really enhance the preclinical development, move into getting consultants and affording CROs and doing that. I think in parallel, we were getting some grant support from a pharmaceutical company to work on other aspects of the project. And this was investigator initiated, and it allowed us to do two things. One is to develop potentially other indications down the line. And actually, it also established a good rapport between our lab and this particular pharmaceutical company, which when we went back to them for more money, they instead decided to invest in the company. So we had established trust with them, which then paid off with our current funding.
That's great. That's a really great example of how to find an early adopter. Now, you said you had grant support from pharma. Was that grant support? Was it a sponsored research agreement? Was there a contract involved there? Or I'm just a little bit curious about that.
It was what they call an investigator-initiated study, where the pharmaceutical company had put out an RFA looking for proposals dealing with certain diseases that they were interested in. Most of what they wanted, of course, were clinical studies. We put in an animal study, and fortunately for us, they saw the merits in it. It was a little weird application because there was IRB, no IACUC, but of course we were IACUC and not IRB. So we were sort of like a square peg in a round hole, but they supported us and gave us a couple $100,000 to do some very basic studies that, as I said, we did it, we delivered the results, and it really got us on their radar screen for subsequent support.
Oh, that's interesting. What did they want in return?
They just wanted the results. I mean, there were no deliverables. The deliverables were the results of the studies, but otherwise we were free and clear to publish anything we wanted to publish. They gave us some drugs that we used to create our animal model. And again, as long as we didn't do anything to alter the drug, they didn't have any intellectual property claims on what we did. And so it was really, and they even paid the Emory rate for indirect cost recovery. So everybody was happy.
Wow. Okay, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Jeff, there's a question for you here from someone in the audience. Any strategies for attracting VC funding in a system where commercialization return for orphan diseases is low?
Yes. I think, in fact, I heard this over and over again at this NORD meeting that I was at the last 2 days, which is, and we didn't do this, and I could kick myself for not realizing it, but when you talk to the VCs, get patients and patient advocates involved in helping you make your case to the VC. The biggest hurdle we ran into was lack of understanding by the potential investors as to the consequences of the disease for the patients. And I could tell them how miserable a lifestyle it was, what an imposition, and in many cases they'd come back to us and say, well, what's the big deal? Just drink 20 quarts of water a day. And we'd say, that's not a solution. People with kidney stones, we tell them to drink 2 quarts a day and they don't do it. And they pay the price for that in terms of kidney stones. This is 20 liters around. And so I think we now, on our company, we now have a patient, an adult patient with the disorder. And when he speaks to investors, it carries so much more weight than me even as a nephrologist saying it. And what I heard at this meeting several times when that exact question was asked is the VC people said, bring a patient to the discussion. So that would be my advice. If there is a patient advocacy group, which many of these orphan diseases have, or a foundation, but get someone who can really tell them what it's like to live with this disease, or a caregiver if the patients themselves are not able to communicate due to their disease. Sob stories work. I mean, you could see it, but that's who you're trying to help, is to make sure that there were no more sob stories.
Thank you. That's great. I have another question here. I think, Jeff, you probably touched upon it, but maybe we can ask Sally and Yogi. How do you identify and initiate strategic partnerships? And what was the desired outcomes of those partnerships, sort of to get traction on your technology? Sally, would you like to?
Well, so as a CSO, I wasn't as involved in this type of partnership development. I'm more just like a show off. So, but in our industry for point of care diagnostics, we naturally would like to expand the use of point of care diagnostics. So we'd like to partner with organizations that expand the use of point of care, so pharmacies and other potential customers in that way. And then just personally, I'd also be interested in partnering with investigators who are interested in using molecular technology to reach new diseases or new areas, cancer or emerging infectious disease. So I'd be interested to apply the technology to areas that outside of my realm, that where I've worked has been mostly HIV and HIV associated infection. So I think that would be what I'd be interested in, is kind of expanding the scope of how we can apply our technology to improve health.
Yogi, I'll ask you a similar question. How important are strategic partnerships for your business, and in terms of being able to validate your technology and get a first adopter? And what are your plans or strategies for that?
Yeah, we have a capital purchase system that a hospital would buy, and then there's disposables that go with it, right? So these are minimally invasive probes inserted under CT guidance. From the beginning, we knew that in the early days, this is before COVID, we knew that we could walk into a hospital, we could get the value assessment committees for each of these divisions to look at our data, say we need this technology, and they would buy it, and then they would use it. And then COVID washed it away and said, okay, now majority of hospital institutions, their models are such that they would prefer someone come in with the capital equipment. They will use it for the case. They'll pay you a premium on your disposable, and then they'll walk away and say, okay, you handle the capital. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want the risk. We don't want to have to maintain, et cetera. And so in the early days, our strategy was always to partner with the distributor. We had identified 3 regional distributors we had talked to in the early days about product definition, getting their feedback again, because in those early days, they knew what worked and what didn't work well. And then when this whole shift happened in healthcare economics and how hospitals are approaching it, what we really started to do is look at strategics like larger med tech devices, Medtronics and Varians and Siemens and Boston Scientifics, et cetera. And we realized that, yes, we could go down this distributorship partner approach, but now we become extremely squeezed from a business model financials perspective, because there's this middle person that's also now getting out there and getting to have this extra premium, but we don't get to actually trickle in any of those to our buckets. And so really all of our decisions about partnerships and strategics, whether it's a distributor or whether it's a large medical device company that's going to potentially take this and be a sales phase for it, we're driven by the fact that, we were looking at the challenges of how the money flows in procedures like ours, and where can we as a small company with limited resources, even if you go raise a $15 million Series A, I mean, how much does that move the needle for you valuation wise, and from a perspective of getting out there, right, with a system like ours? So we always tied it to what's going to give us the greatest coverage from our product is out there perspective. And then if that meant we need to find a strategic, then we look at it that way, because for our modeling purposes, it makes a lot more sense to partner with a large company that is going to overnight after FDA clearance get our system into 300 hospitals, as opposed to trying to go down a distributorship where we have to roll out slowly, or even us trying to do it ourselves, which is it's a 3 to 5 year curve to actually gain that kind of traction. So I think looking at it that way, it's helped us a ton in saying, okay, what's the most sensible decision?
Jeff, you did touch upon this, but would you like to talk a little bit more about how you found those strategic partnerships and what they look like? And
so we found our strategic partner by one of their main products, therapies, had a side effect of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. And that was to some extent limiting the compliance with their drug. And so I approached them. That's really where our grant came in, was to look at, could we reduce the side effects of their main therapy? And so it was a nice alignment. They weren't really thinking in terms of limiting the side effects, but it didn't take long for them to connect the same dots that we had connected. And so it was a kind of a logical, strategic alignment. We also pitched to many other potential strategic partners who were working either in the orphan disease space or particularly in the renal space. And many strategics look to build a portfolio of companies that they either invest in or acquire. And so we sort of shifted from really just pitching VCs to looking for anyone working in the renal space who seemed to have a part of their company that looked to invest. And we pitched a number of them, but the one we ended up with was most clearly aligned, but there was interest in others. So I guess what I would say is think broadly about how your technology, who might be interested, even though they don't know that they should be interested, or else just as part of a bigger portfolio, because that's where we got our most traction.
Very interesting.
Yeah, Cindy, can I just add to that? So one of to what Jeff just said about, think about who might be interested and they don't know. So the greatest success that we've had from where we are today, strategic, these discussions that we have with larger companies, is that from the early days, we just started knocking on their doors and telling them what we're doing. And of course, we keep the secret stuff secret, but you know, it is extremely valuable. It's always easy, I think, especially for us that come from academic world. We don't like to tell everybody everything, or we don't like to tell people what we've done until we're done with it, or we want to have data. But you know, I think it's important to remember that we're not publishing a paper here. We're spending millions of dollars to build a product that hopefully somebody will buy and turn into 10x of that value, right? And knocking on those doors early and telling them a little bit about what you're doing, they're not going to go copy what you do. I mean, I know everyone out there says, "Oh, don't tell people are going to steal your IP, etc." I'm not saying don't tell them don't hold things back, but these big companies have a lot of inertia. They can't just shift tomorrow and say, "Oh, we're going to go do this because some random startup guy said this," right? So I wouldn't worry too much about that, because the value added to you as an individual from what you hear from them is going to be significant orders of magnitude higher than what you think they are getting from you, right?
I love that comment. Yeah. I wish that that's fantastic. So I run into that all the time with people doing customer discovery and just feeling really hesitant. Oh, they're going to steal my IP, and then they're hesitant to really do anything. So that's a great comment. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't say it enough, because we've just remember, all I would say to everybody listening there is these are huge companies that already have momentum in what they're doing. And that means they have inertia too, to keep doing what they're doing. They're not going to change because they heard something that you think is the next best thing, which might be the next best thing, but that's just not how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, we had two pitch decks. We had the pitch deck that we talked about before a CDA, and then another one after a CDA. So you can say, assuming you've got your patents already, you can disclose a certain amount with some safety, but yeah, you have to keep some part hidden behind the curtain. So
yeah, you don't want to show your composition of matter necessarily.
Exactly.
Right. So how did you guys decide the right time to spin out your companies? Maybe I'll start with Jeff and go that way this time.
Well, we had got to the point where we needed an SBIR or an STTR, and so that was really the point. We knew there was no other way for us to move forward, and of course, you have to have a company to do that. So that's what triggered us, was the need to try to apply for those grants.
Perfect. Yogi, can you comment on that? What's the right time? Yeah. How did you decide?
Yeah, it was, I would say it's a combination of what Jeff just said, which is I think we had exhausted what we felt like were, within reach grants that we could get funding from, non-dilutive sources. I think we had submitted some NIH, NSF, SBIRs, STTRs. We hadn't had as much luck there. And those are always, I think, just submit and forget. But we had raised what we thought there. We knew we needed capital, and now we needed more capital than just what a grant was going to do, because we needed to push beyond a prototype. But the other is that we were starting to develop IP that, and I know this is a university call, so please don't anybody come at me for this, but we were developing IP outside of anything of confines of the university. And it's important to know that, the universities are a great breeding ground for IP, but to turn that into a product, there is more innovation that you will have to do.
Right.
And, that IP, being able to secure that outside for the company's value, not just the university value at that point, because there's no need to give a university X 15% for an IP that no resource reads. That's when we really said, okay, look, we need to start delineating a little bit, because we can't keep filing new IP that has tremendous value, but then have significant amounts of money that's obligated for that IP when there's just nothing that was rewarded. And it's all fair. The offices are great. Emory OTT has been fantastic to work with, so I don't think they'll hate me for saying that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. Sally, do you have any thoughts you can share about the right time to spin out a company and what your experience was?
So I think we had a couple of small kind of catalyzer type awards where we were able to put together prototypes for kind of proving our concept that we could make this work. And so that was turned to be the time because we needed to bring in more money to be able to build more expensive prototypes, et cetera, that we could get with kind of these smaller awards. And when you apply for NIH funding, like you said, it's submit and forget it. I mean, it comes in so slowly after you've applied. It's just not tenable. So that proved to be the right time for us. It was kind of, we knew that we were going in the right direction and we needed to bring in more money to really make that happen.
So I will ask biggest learning experience that you can share with the audience, and what would you have done differently? Jeff, you want to start with that one? Everybody loves to hear the answer to that one.
Sure. Well, I think the biggest, I guess, learning opportunity is just being cognizant of starting as a the typical R01 funded investigator, to begin to think about being aware that if you're going to bring anything to patients, it has to be commercialized, and you have to think about going through the appropriate process, protecting your intellectual property, and just being aware of a different, that there's more than just R01 world. But I think the biggest thing I would have done in hindsight would have been getting at least a patient involved with us when we were really intensively pitching to VCs and strategics to really tell the story that we couldn't tell. And so I think getting patient involvement early, it also was educational, because there are things that I didn't even think about as we're planning clinical trials that the patients inform me of, but really getting them involved early and listening to them so that really where the goal line is, where you have to get to, and they will help you get there. And I wish I had done that a few years back. I might have already be not at Emory if I had done that. Not that I mind being at Emory, but you get the point.
Well, by the way, congratulations on this next move of yours. I think.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's really great. Yogi, do you have any comments, any learnings that you can share, or what
I think
done?
I think I highlighted this earlier, but I think coming from the academic world, there's I think we all have mindsets of the data's got to be perfect, or we've got to be able to articulate the full story. We've got to be able to show everything is done before we can really, push forward from a commercialization product perspective. And I think coming from academia, coming from, let's say, a physician co-founder partnership, which has been great, I think having those barriers sort of properly titrated, or being educated on really what needs to be those thresholds for moving forward, I think has always been something that's made it more difficult for us. Meaning, we've always tried to give ourselves higher bars that we need to get to, when we forget to realize that we're not trying to publish a paper here. What we're trying to do is build a product that meets the requirements of the clinical world and meets the benefits of the patient. And I say that because it's so easy to go scope creep on your product or your therapeutic, et cetera, and say, let's do this and this and this and this and this. And before you know it, you've extended your engineering timeline by 6 months and spent another $500,000 that you didn't allocate for, right? So I think that is definitely a good lesson learned, but in our case, where we have just built such a big system and we tried to perfect everything when the real critical value proposition was probably 3 or 4 things.
Excellent. Sally, what are some of your learnings? What would you have done differently?
Well, I I don't think I would have done anything differently, but I do have a lot of learnings. So, and I think a big thing that I think that has this experience has provided me is that, like Jeff mentioned, you know, coming from an academic environment, I was more focused on grants and in the diagnostic area, grants. There aren't that many grant opportunities, you know, and so you feel like everybody's kind of chasing the ball, and you know, so you don't have to rely on what NIH says they want or uh, what's the fashion of the time, but you know, find out what's needed in the marketplace, and you can find the money in different ways, you know, and so follow what you think you should do, and you'll figure out the funding, or you won't, but I think you will as you go forward, because you're actually working on something that is wanted or needed in the marketplace. So I guess just don't be afraid or feel stuck based on the known funding sources, but think outside and come up with some new ways.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Just going to stop for a moment, and if you do, please put them in the chat. I'll just wait a couple of minutes to see, or a minute to see if anybody has anything more to ask before I ask my last question. Okay, well, I don't see anything. So this is going to be more of a question for Jeff and Yogi. Can you give any advice to those folks that are looking to apply to Biolocity, as you both had Biolocity funding, or any other early stage funding mechanism? What would be your advice to those folks?
Well, I would say Biolocity, both as Coulter and now as Biolocity with the different technology, has really been incredibly helpful to us. I would say in both cases, meet with them early. They have opportunities where you can arrange early, I forget the exact word, but there are places where you can put in and say, do you think this has any legs? Can we meet? Can we help educate me on it? Be responsive to what they tell you. Go back and so work with them early. Work to craft a good proposal. There are many stages in the process where you get to practice your pitches. Learning how to do a pitch is very different from giving a scientific presentation at a conference. So that would be my advice. Ask them early and listen to the advice. Don't get defensive. And then a big part of the program that I don't think we've talked about is you get tremendous free advice on the business side of things. And at least for me, I had no experience with any of that. And so that's almost as valuable as the money that you get to do your experiments.
Thank you. Yogi?
Yeah, I'll build off of Jeff on that one. So we applied to Biolocity twice. First time, it was exactly that. We didn't necessarily have enough about, we had a technology definition, we had our clinical, we had our biological stuff, but we had really left out everything about what it meant to turn this into a business. And, you know, a priority to that presentation, we just didn't think it mattered. And we had not engaged with them to say, let's review this. And I think that was to our deficit. And so definitely engage early. But also, I think in the second time when we presented, I think what the only thing we really did different is we said, we don't know these things. We have a lot of questions, and these are the questions that we still need help answering. And based off of what we know about Biolocity, we think you can help us. And I think that's great. So treat it like a pitch where your last slide is an ask, and that ask slide is, how do we turn this into a business? And I think that will do wonders. So that would be the only thing I could recommend.
Oh, that's great. Great advice. Well, I think we're about that. Those are about all the questions that I have. Are there any other comments that you guys or panelists would like to make to our audience, or any other questions from the audience? I think we covered a lot of ground. I know I found it really, really, really interesting. Let's see. We have something that has come in here. Okay, here's a question. Do you think there is currently enough infrastructure in Atlanta that you'd be comfortable with having a large-scale non-virtual company based here? If not now, do you anticipate that coming in the future? Anybody want to take a stab at that one? Sally, you're at
Sure.
advantage there, but Yogi, Jeff.
Yeah, I think the Atlanta ecosystem in general, in biomedical technology, biotech, medtech, health tech, et cetera, there's a lot of efforts going on from hospital institutions, the universities, the state is doing a ton of stuff. I think the ecosystem's grown really well. I think you'll find a tremendous amount of support. Had Focus Cryo not been started pretty much right when COVID, was announced, I think we would not be virtual. I think we would have preferred to be all in person, but we've built a lot of momentum that way, and we've stuck to that. So I think you'll find a lot of great success. There's a lot of good stuff coming at Georgia Tech. And the best part, I think, is you have access to some fantastic human capital, some really smart people doing a lot of smart things, tackling a lot of hard problems, and doing it well. So VCs are noticing. So I don't think you'll have to worry about, not being in Boston or in Silicon Valley or et cetera to find money either.
Yeah. And I would just add, I think Georgia Bio runs a lot of good programs that are informative. I know one of the limitations we ran into why we never with getting an SBIR was incubator space. And the new space you mentioned on the Emory campus that I guess is just opening. I know that Science Park at Georgia Tech has new opportunities. And there's another development coming in. I've forgotten the name of the company who's partnering with that, but that's maybe somebody else remembers that'll be there. I think it's a much riper environment than say it was 5 years ago. And so I think it is a good place. And then, the other thing, of course, is the airport, and you can fly off. If you have to actually travel to meet with people in person, it's a whole lot easier from Atlanta than it is from someplace that doesn't have as many nonstop flights. But that's an advantage too. And as Yogi said, the intellectual capital between all the universities in Atlanta themselves and in the environs. You had asked earlier about how to separate the commercial aspects from the rest of the lab. We do all of our commercial work with research specialists, mostly post-bacs, kids between college and something else, and we leave our non-commercial science. That's what we do with the trainees. We keep a firewall between the two, which just makes my life at Emory easier not to try to blur that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point that we didn't touch upon, but that's a really good point. And you had you referred to Science Square. That's the big mixed-use facility that's being built out on the north side of Georgia Tech campus. And Portal Innovations is a company that it's a venture capital company that will be having one floor there, and they will be building out incubator space. But we also have at Science Square BioSparks Labs, which is similar to Lab to Launch. And it's turnkey lab space that people can lease. So, well, great. I think with that, I don't see, April has added a link to learning more about the Biolocity application process and scheduling a meeting with the Biolocity team. So everybody feel free to go there if you're interested in that. Again, they are accepting applications now through December and for their next round, their next set of cohorts. So anyway, I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to help our innovation community. So I really appreciate it.